I feel scammed, traumatized, and I'm never going to be able to look at Emma Stone or Mark Ruffalo the same way again. Maybe you know what I'm talking about and you're like, oh, I want to go see that movie because yes, Emma Stone is a great actor. And I was like, pop off 2023, she made a new movie, let's go fucking watch it. If you see this preview, it's nothing like the actual fucking movie. For context, I'm going to read this shit. This is how crazy different it is from the actual description. Brought back to life by an unorthodox scientist, a young woman runs off with a lawyer on a whirlwind adventure across the continents. Free from the prejudices of her times, she grows steadfast in her purpose to stand for equality and liberation. It sounds like a second chance at life. It sounds like a great adventure, free fun, no prejudices on her back. Let me get into this shit already. So when she's brought back to life, she's like a suicide victim, and she jumped off of a cliff as a pregnant woman and committed suicide, and this scientist stumbled upon her body and was like, damn, her body hasn't even set into rigor mortis. Let's try to revive this bitch. He gets her body, he takes it back to his lab, he hooks her up to this Frankenstein shit on each side of her lobes. But he had a thought. He said, what if I don't put her back to her regular life because she was already sorrow or miserable or whatever because she committed suicide? So he was like, hey, what if I take the baby out of her stomach, cut the baby's brain out, take the lady's brain out, switch that shit, and wake her up? It's already fucked up, right? Okay, and then so he teaches these classes because he's like a surgeon or a doctor or whatever. And he has like one of his students at his lecture, he asks him to see him after class, and then whatever, he hires him on to take notes over the girl, her name is Bella, to take notes of her and show her progress and stuff like that. Naturally, this guy was curious, but he didn't read too much into it. After like a few days with her, he was like, why is she like this? Like, what's wrong with her? He didn't really get into it, but he was like, basically, don't ask questions. So she was literally like a baby learning how to talk and shit. Like the brain of like an infant or a toddler, like that was her. So after a little while, the scientist, he asked her like, how do you think about her? Like, how do you feel about her? Do you like her? He was like, basically like, yeah, I'm attracted to her. And he was like, the scientist was like, I want you to marry her. So it was basically agreed that they were gonna marry. So they drew up this contract so it's basically like a conservatorship where she couldn't leave the house or anything and like just be under basically their supervision all the time and couldn't do nothing like by herself. So they hired this lawyer to basically legalize these papers, legalize the contract. He took one look at it and was like, this is a little fucked up. But he didn't look like one of those people that are good anyways. He was like, I must meet this woman. And he went over there and like saw her. And then he ended up talking to her. And when he talked to her, he fucking molested her. Mind you, she still has baby brain. And then he was like, oh, basically like, I want to talk to you later. So he comes in the middle of the night. The lawyer comes in the middle of the night. He scales the wall to the house. And they meet each other on the roof. And he basically tells her like, you can't be bound to nothing, like you should come travel with me and like experience the world, like you need a taste of life. So then she goes back like later, like the next day, she goes back to the scientist and she was like, I want to go, I'm going to marry this man that you want me to marry, but I want to go on this adventure with the lawyer before that. And basically, if you don't let me go, I'm going to hate you forever. And the scientist cares about her, I guess, like he loves her. He created like what she is. And he was like, okay, well, if you want to go, then go. And then the guy who was going to marry her, which was like the colleague or whatever, he was all pissed off, whatever, you're not leaving. And the girl was like, you can't stop me. So she ended up going with the fucking lawyer. The red flag motherfucker who raped her, basically molested her. He goes with her on this trip. And then, basically, like, a bunch of fucking sex scenes happen. It's like sex scene after sex scene after sex scene. Mind you, still baby brain. The guy ends up falling in love with her or whatever, but she naturally wants to wander. He, like, falls asleep after sex one time, and she's like, I'm fucking bored. And she goes and wanders, like, the area that they're at. I don't know, I think they're in Lebanon or something like that. They're in Portugal. I can't really remember. So she ends up meeting, like, different people. And then I guess, like, along the way, she lets somebody else, like, have their way with her. Because obviously she doesn't fucking know any better. Then he finds out about it later on, and he gets all fucking pissed off. He, like, blows a gasket. Because at this point, he's, like, in love with her. She's starting to get tired of him and, like, him, like, blowing up and trying to control her and keep her in the room. And he eventually takes her on this ship or whatever to, like, control her further because he didn't want her, like, going around and, like, being on her own in the world. So he put her on this cruise ship, and she was like, you're trying to contain me, bro. So then she ends up talking to people on that ship, which she, like, has friends with, and they're, like, kind of telling her, like, like, that guy's not all there, basically. So basically, it's, like, her, like, talking to new people, and she's, like, he keeps blowing up, storming out, and, like, getting drunk and gambling. This is the final straw, which broke his back, and he was like, fuck this bitch already. He, like, won really big one night in the casino. He passed out, like, all drunk. She came in, took all his money, put it in, like, a little box, and was like, I'm gonna go give it to, like, the poor, because this other guy on the boat showed her, like, the slums of the world. It was, like, really bad, where it was, like, people in poverty and, like, naked and, like, just really bad living conditions. And she was, like, super sad and was, like, crying. So she took all the money, she put it in a box to give it to them, but she didn't even give it to them. She gave it to the sailor, and the sailor was, like, on the ship, he was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna give it to the poor. Like, you're doing a good thing. Obviously, he takes the money for himself. So then they have no money, and the guy finds out, the lawyer finds out, and he gets, like, super, like, crazy, and he's like, what the hell? Like, what are we gonna do, basically? And so they get kicked off in Paris. They get kicked off the boat. And so she's like, well, we need money. So she, like, left him at a bench because he, like, passed out. And she was like, I'm gonna go make some money. And she found, like, this whorehouse. And she had a client, and she made a little money. She came back with a croissant, a little sweet dessert, and gave it to him. And he was like, where'd you get this? And she was like, oh yeah, I sold myself for sex. And don't tell me, oh yeah, another bad thing that women do. Because I don't know, because she's still learning, so she doesn't know, like, the etiquettes of life. And he's like, yeah, it's the worst fucking thing a woman can do. And early on, before, like, she went on this trip, the scientist had put money, like, sewed it into, like, one of her fabrics that she had in case of emergency. And she pulled that out, and he was like, you've had money this whole time, bro? So he, like, basically lost, he was, like, at his wit's end with her, because he fell in love with her, and everything that she was doing was, like, fucking him over, like, I guess. So he took the money from her and said, you cunt, and left. And that was fucked up. He left her alone. So she went back to the whorehouse and pimped herself out so she could have more money. And that was the prejudices. That was the freedom from her prejudices, so she doesn't have to be under a man's wing. But still, man, this is like, she's whoring herself around. So then that goes into a bunch more fucking sex scenes. Sex scene with different clients. Emma's nips are on the screen, and all me and my boyfriend can do is just look at each other like, oh my god, like, when is this gonna end? I only stayed because I was like, maybe it'll get better. Maybe she'll leave the grasp of these people, and she'll go on her way like the fucking preview said, the description. But no, it just keeps getting worse. And she has all those clientele or whatever. And he even tries to come back and say, Belle, like, I miss you, like, come back to me. And she's like, go home. Like, what the hell are you still doing here? But then the scientist dies. I have to hurry up because it's almost over. The scientist was dying, so she went back home. She was going to remarry the guy, but when she was going to get married to him, the colleague guy, the lawyer came back with her original husband. So she went with him. She was like, I want to see how my life was before, which wasn't even her life because she's a baby now. And basically, he was like a fucking sadistic weirdo. He was like, you can't leave the house for a year, yada, yada, yada. So she ended up, like, having to, like, chloroform him because he made a cocktail for her so he could, like, do surgery to get her clitoris off because he was like, oh, this is the root of all your problems. This is why you're the way you are. So he passes out. She takes him back to her house with the guy she's going to marry, and they switch the brains of a lamb with the fucking husband of her old husband. And then They live happily ever after. Don't